a bit excited and lose track of time. Quite common. So, thanks Cecilia for the introduction. Thank you Matthias and Stockholm for having me here. This is kind of third time lucky for me. The first year Matthias invited me here, I told him yes, I'd be very humbled and very pleased to talk in Stockholm. And 2 weeks out, I cancelled on him. Last year, same thing happened. I cancelled on him with only 2 days to go. Owing to his generous spirit, he invited me back for one last chance, but I must do exactly what he says, including wearing the JFocus hat and saying every 5 minutes that Matthias is awesome. So, I have an alter ego, it's known as the Diabolical Developer, and you will hopefully see why. This talk kind of splits into two. I partly tell lies, and I partly tell lies. And it's up to you to decide what is truth and what is fiction. So, modern software development anti-patterns. And the reason why I give this talk is because we have been developing software now for 30, 40 years. And especially in the last 10 years, we have picked up new languages, new frameworks, new tooling, all this wonderful new stuff. The hardware we have today we can work with is incredible. And yet, we still cannot deliver software projects on time. We're absolutely rubbish at it. Who here has delivered a software project on time and on budget with high quality in the past year? Okay, you're all lying. So, quick public service announcement. As Cecilia mentioned, I try and do a lot of work, and many of my Java user group colleagues have joined me in this effort to actually help improve Java and the Java ecosystem itself. So please do take a minute to grab those Twitter URLs and follow along. I was only allowed to mention Devoxx UK because we'd like to announce one of our big name speakers for Devoxx UK, Matthias Carlson. So we have anti-pattern number one, and people here will be very familiar with this, conference speakers in particular. It's known as deadline-driven delivery. So if you've ever had a manager tell you that I don't care what you build as long as you build it by the end of next week, because that's when the customer is expecting the software, you'll know what I'm talking about. So I was on the Varden boat cruise last night, and they were telling me about their fun times they had building Varden 7. And after about 16 months of development, I think their CEO finally put his foot down and said, you're shipping a product next week and I don't care what state it's in. So I like to say that real professionals hack code minutes before the deadline, and if you're a conference speaker, you finish your slides like I was upstairs instead of listening to Mark before I come up on stage. And the reason why you should do this is because humans actually produce their best work under stress. So instead of giving yourself plenty of time to write that code, write the tests, do the proper design, just hack something up at the last minute at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I can almost guarantee you'll get a better result out of it. Seriously. Alternatively, you could follow the expression of prevention prevents piss poor performance. It's an old military saying, something that my sergeant major yelled at me when I was a young man. I couldn't iron a shirt correctly, and because I tried to do it at the last minute, I got a dressing down from my CO, and my sergeant major got a dressing down by the CO, and yeah, I kind of learnt my lesson from there. So practically speaking, what can you do? Maybe instead of doing things at the absolute last minute, you can take some of the lessons that we've learnt from the world of Agile, and what I mean here is little a Agile. Do see Dan North later on if you want to hear more ranting against capital A Agile. But I'll start right now. Do we have any people who are Scrum certified masters in the room? Okay, let me just walk over to the exit here. Is that still going? Yep. So the exit over here is for the Scrum certified masters. You're welcome to leave any time. Scrum certified masters, or the Scrum certification, is a pyramid scheme. It is designed for the people at the top to make more money, and they try and tell you that with a one-week course, you are more qualified than someone who's had 10 years of experience delivering multi-million-dollar projects. Absolute nonsense. However, there are some good ideas in the world of Scrum and Kanban and XP, including things like pair programming, retrospectives, spiking and stabilizing. So these are little ideas you can and should take away for your teams, but only pick the ones that suit you and your culture and the culture of your team. There is no point in applying all of them in one big go, because you will fail and your manager will say this agile stuff was complete nonsense, and you'll go back to writing 8-week design documents that are 60 pages in length before you even write a single line of code again. Horrible. Next anti-pattern. Is Sweden kind of suffering from recessionary times at the moment? Economy's a little bit tough? Yeah? Well, in England, where I'm currently living, we're on our 3rd mini recession. And so as a developer, you have to be very careful about sharing your code or sharing information with your colleagues. Because knowledge is power. Knowledge allows you to keep your job. And the first person to get fired should be your colleague and not you, because you have to pay the mortgage off. Very important. So don't communicate with your team, don't communicate with your manager in particular, and make sure you take your source code home on a USB stick every night. In other words, be like this guy. Be a cave troll. It's the only way you're going to keep your job. In 2 years' time, I may change my mind once the economy picks up again, but for now, you've got to be tough. Alternatively, you could argue that we should not succumb to fear. The tech industry is actually surprisingly vibrant and buoyant at the moment. If you talk to any CTOs or hiring managers in places like Silicon Valley or London, Berlin, any of the larger tech centers around the world, they are desperate for engineers. They are desperate for good engineers. They are desperate for the sort of people who turn up to conferences like JFocus, run by that amazing guy, Matthias Carlson. If you really don't like your day-to-day job today, converting XML to Java and Java back to XML again, don't panic, right? There are actually good jobs out there for you. So go contact your local recruiter in the startup space especially, and go do something fun for a change. One of the practical things you can do to get this reputation and to be known as the sort of person who is a ×5 or ×10 multiplier for a team is to communicate effectively. This means that when you're dealing with an English team, you can't really swear at them in Swedish. I'm sorry, that doesn't really help. Does anyone here follow the Linux kernel mailing list? Anyone? One person over there? Okay. So quite famously on that mailing list, there have been lots and lots of good technical ideas that have been proposed with full patches and everything else. The same goes for OpenJDK, so for Java itself. Lots of good ideas coming to the mailing lists, but they're communicated very poorly. Okay? The people don't encourage other developers to join them. They document it poorly. Other developers don't understand what they're trying to say, and the idea never gets through. So quite often you'll find, especially in open source, that the worst technical ideas are actually implemented, but they are the ideas that the original developer was able to communicate the best. Here's one that all of us magpies or dragons like, distracted by shiny. Who here has tried a new technology or bought a new phone or a new tablet or a Raspberry Pi in the last month? You wouldn't be technical people if you didn't. So we have this really terrible habit of going for the pile of gold, for the next shiny thing around the corner. Ooh, look at Scala. It's so much nicer than Java. It gives me so much more power. Scala is one of those interesting languages where it does give you all the power in the world, and it's like giving a Formula One car to a 9-year-old child, and the results are often disastrous. However, I say, certainly you always use the latest technology. It's well known that if you're the first market mover, or if you're on the bleeding edge, that you will have competitive advantage over your competitors and your colleagues. Don't forget, economic tough times, got to be ahead of your colleagues. Alternatively, you can actually have the best of both worlds. And this is something that a lot of development teams struggle to persuade with their managers in particular. Managers are usually quite risk averse. Okay? Running an IT project, which almost always fails, is risky enough as it is. And having some developer walk up to you and say, Scala is the new shiny thing, or, ooh, have you seen Clojure, is bound to make any project manager run away screaming. However, if you can sit down with your manager and sit down with your colleagues and come up with a simple list of criteria of why you want to evaluate this new technology, it can actually be very, very persuasive. When you then take the time to sit down with your colleagues, let's say in lunchtime sessions or maybe an evening at the local Java user group meeting, and prototype these new technologies, actually try using Scala as a DSL or try using Groovy as a DSL. Maybe use Node.js to do some asynchronous communication back with your browser. All these little things you can try. You can generally speaking get up and running with them in about 2-3 hours, maybe half a day at the worst. And if you can't, it's a bad technology choice anyway. So prototype and evaluate, and you will actually be able to still use the latest shiny toys, but shiny toys that actually help your business and help your project. I mentioned this already, brown bag sessions, so grabbing lunch with your colleagues, get around a laptop and a projector maybe, and just have a look at a new technology. It's really easy to do, much more fun than discussing how to convert Java to XML. Next one, design-driven design. Who here has got bits of paper printed all over the walls of their office with lots of class design diagrams and sequence diagrams and flowcharts and things? There must be some system architects in the room, some technical architects. You guys love this stuff. Come on, there we go. So you see something like this, right? And this was produced beautifully for me by IBM's Rational Unified Process project thingamajig, awesome tool, which does this for you. So I have quite successfully on contracts walked in on day one, drawn up the diagram in Rational Unified Process days 2 and 3, and hit the print code button. And for the next 2.5 months, I sat there and played Quake all day and got paid, and it was brilliant. So why handwrite code anymore when you can use one of these tools? In reality, what you really need to do is think about designing what you need for now. There is a famous expression of Yagni, you ain't gonna need it. And we've had an unfortunate history in Java, especially in enterprise Java, of over-designing the living daylights out of our software. We love to talk about n-tier architectures. You're saving someone's username and their birth date for crying out loud. You don't need 7 layers to do that. Yet most applications I see with Java EE or Java or J2 EE in them do exactly that. So please stop, because the Ruby on Rails kids are absolutely killing us in this area. And they're just laughing at us. And it's no good at all. So sometimes we are our own worst enemies. So one trick you can play with your teams, if you have junior programmers, you should pay them for the amount of code they produce. You should encourage that creativity, encourage them to write tests, encourage them to write lots of code. And then you pay your senior developers to take code away. Quite seriously. So when you see the commits come in from your senior developers, there should be more negative lines of code than there should be positive lines of code. And that's how you should reward those guys. Try it. Try it for a week. You'll be surprised at the results. You'll probably end up swapping to Groovy. Next, anti-pattern, and this is certainly a favorite amongst children or parents of children in particular. So I think I can use the laser pointer here, maybe. This is being borrowed off someone else. Oh, here we go. There's model view controller. There's session facade. I think we've got a DAO there, visitor pattern. And for those of you who were in Venkat's talk earlier, he absolutely nailed this on the head. He hates design patterns. And I generally speaking, hate them as well. And the reason is because technical architects and team leads in particular love to beat their teams to death with design patterns. They get the copy of Gang of Four, they thump it on the desk and say, we will use 5 of these patterns in our N-tier architecture because it is best practices. Please, please do not follow best practices. Follow better practices. Always, always, always challenge the status quo. Otherwise, we will never move ahead as an industry. So yeah, if you're going to be truly evil, and again, if you want to keep your job, use all the Gang of Four design patterns. Make sure that when your boss walks past, that you are saying that you're using best practices, because that always gets good attention. Venkat did allude to this as well, that the appropriate design pattern is actually your friend. But generally speaking, you should find this through a voyage of quick, agile discovery as opposed to deciding up front. Another way to look at this is that good design patterns, ones that will actually stand the test of time, start out as a pattern. Let's say, for example, dependency injection or inversion of control. Then they move into a framework, Juice, Pico container, Spring. And eventually the ones that are really valuable, the ones that stand the test of time, become language features in their own right. So Java now has JSR 3.3.0 as part of it. So there is standardized dependency injection for Java. And for Java EE, there is CDI, which is context and dependency injection, again, a standard part of the platform. So when you go reaching for the next quick pattern, think about how long it's been around for, and make sure you've got a real use case for it. Another practical step you can do to detect whether you need a pattern or not is, 1, see if you are detecting any duplicate code in your code base, or any boilerplate code in your code base, and use whiteboards. Check your assumptions out with your colleagues, and especially combine looking at source code with a diagram on a whiteboard, designing out the flow of information going through your code. The reason is because it's very, very difficult to apply a dry pattern out of a book to running software. This is why a lot of people misuse design patterns in particular. So you need to look at the two in conjunction. And don't be afraid to change them. So I'm the CTO of JClarity. We're a little startup. We do performance tooling in the Java and JVM space, especially for the cloud, because we're hipsters, and I'm going to go on to cloud a little bit later. I see this time and time again. My application is performing slowly. It's that string concatenation which is causing the problem. Or, oh, it must be Hibernate, which is actually kind of true most of the time. Let's be honest. Can we just get rid of Hibernate now, please? Horrible. But quite seriously, we constantly see teams and clients do this. There's always a performance problem in production, and the first thing that a team does is start panicking. The business is yelling at you. You're losing 10,000 euros a day, or a minute if you're working for a bank. And the pressure's on, and people just start guessing. Oh, it's a string concatenation. Oh, it must be because we don't have enough RAM. Maybe we should virtualize the operating system. I know, if we put a fiber cable in the back, it'll all go faster. And people have stopped going back to first principles. What you really need to do is invoke the gods, quite frankly. You need to go back to the roots of the old, hope I'm getting this right, the old Viking days, etc., 2,000 years ago. You've got to light the black candles, you've got to sacrifice the chickens, because that's the only way you can really performance tune. Modern systems are just far too complex, so you might as well do it this way, because you're going to have just as much luck. My chief scientist, however, Kirk Pepperdine, who's very well known in the industry for Java performance tuning, will actually grab a wooden stick and thwack you over the head and say, just measure. Actually get out your calculator, put in some basic timings, and measure to what's going on. If you put in simple measurements, you can very quickly isolate whether it's the system that's doing all of the work, as in the system space, the Linux kernel, for example, or whether it's something in user space which is causing the problem, which could be your JVM or some bad source code that you have. But by taking measurements quickly in the first couple of hours of seeing a problem occur, you will save yourself weeks and weeks and weeks of time. Go back to what you were told at university, or even when you were small, probably in high school, when you were 13, 14 years old. You're always told to take measurements very carefully in chemistry, for example. So apply that to your computer science as well. There's the shameless plug. Join this community and learn more. This is the other one I like. I'm not going to screw with the demo gods today and swap over to some source code that I have. But I have an open source project that I help run called PCGen. Has anyone heard of PCGen? Any Dungeons and Dragons geeks out there? Yeah, there's a few. Excellent. So for those people in the audience who are PCGen lovers and who have probably therefore looked at the source code, they'll be very familiar with a particular class. PCGen stands for Player Character Generator. It's for helping you control your imaginary character in the imaginary world, and it's a very complicated piece of software. Can anyone tell me how many lines of code do they think that the core player character class has in it? Any guesses? Can we go, what do we think, maybe 1,000? Would that be a reasonable number for an important class? 10,000? 141,192 lines of code in a single Java file. We're quite proud of that beast. And why do we do it? Who here uses Eclipse? I tell you what, having code in one file is so much faster than trying to navigate tabs in Eclipse. So we've actually done this in conferences in the past, and we've proven it many times that in the short term, when you are trying to adjust a piece of code or write a piece of code in, say, an hour or 2 hours and less, having all your code in a single file and being able to use Control-F to find things is still faster than having well-modularized code across multiple tabs and multiple windows. Interesting, isn't it? Uncle Bob, of course, for those of you who know him, would certainly tell me off at this point and say that discrete components based on his 5 solid principles are certainly the way that you should especially behave and lay out your object-oriented code, that hopefully being your Java code. So I always tend to forget what the acronym exactly stands for, but the first one, S, is probably the most important, and it stands for the single responsibility principle. Your class should do one thing and one thing well. Your methods should do one thing and one thing well. And if they're not, then you're probably overcomplicating your class. You're giving the class more than one responsibility, and that will lead you down the path to bad places. So something I like to do practically speaking is we have a small tool which goes across our code base and looks for nouns, looks for naming words. And it brings it up as a tag cloud. And if in the tag cloud we see words like map, list, string, hash map, we know we haven't modeled our domain correctly. We should be seeing business words coming back. We should be seeing domain words coming back. In the case of PCGen, I should be seeing things like player character, spell, equipment, wizard, fighter, deity. These sorts of concepts should be coming through in the source code. If you're not seeing that, then you need to rethink about your modeling and your solid principles. Venkat also talked about this very briefly. In terms of writing maintainable code, you can follow the solid principles, you can have tests, you can have everything well documented. But at the end of the day, as he said, you just have to get someone else to read your code. Now, I always allude to the 3 o'clock in the morning support call. He was actually meaning maybe show your colleague a little bit earlier than that, at a lunchtime session, sharing code again. But if you can read your own source code at 3 o'clock in the morning after you've been on the Varden boat cruise and you're getting ready for JFocus, and the support call comes in onto your iPhone of all things, then you're actually doing okay. And I went through this last night, and it was not fun, I tell you, because my code sucked, and I couldn't read it. Next anti-pattern. Do we have a bit of a startup culture happening here in Sweden? Does anyone here belong to a startup? No, so you all work for big corporate empires. Does Oracle employ everyone in this room? No, no, someone has IBM up there in the corner. Good. Okay, well, I'll go through this fairly quickly. Lean Startup Ninja boils down to this. Your code compiles, just ship the damn thing. Get it out to your users as quickly as possible. Fast feedback and fast failure is paramount to any startup surviving. And you can do this yourself. You can fire your QA team, get rid of all your testers, reduce your hardware costs because you don't need the test platform anymore. Let your users be your testers. Let them give you the feedback early. They'll forgive you. It's fine. Look at Twitter. We still get fail whales, and it gets more users every day. So get your code out there as quickly as possible. You won't regret it. What I'm probably trying to say is that continuous delivery, or continuous deployment, as some people call it, is kind of a new fad which has hit our industry. Some people know it as DevOps. Do we have any DevOps people here? Anyone using Chef or Puppet or tools like that? Only very few. So this concept refers to taking continuous integration one step further. It's the ability to actually package and deploy your product or your service or whatever you're building to productions out into your customers' hands, not once every 2 weeks or once every 6 months, like a lot of organizations do today, but multiple times per day. How many times do you think Facebook deploys to production in a day? They average about 16 to 20 times a day they update Facebook live. Okay? This is an incredibly powerful tool for them, an incredibly powerful technique for any business going forwards. One of the investment banks I was involved with religiously followed continuous deployment. It took them about 2 years of restructuring their infrastructure internally to get to that point. But when Facebook IPO'd, they killed their competitors because they could redeploy their trading algorithms every 10, 15 minutes to adjust for what was happening in the market. Okay? I was told that the 2 years of work for that build infrastructure was paid 10 times over by that single IPO event with Facebook. That's how much more money they made than their competitors. So this is of incredible value. And you can get into this yourself. It's not that difficult. You're already familiar with some of the tools, right? Most people are using Ant, Gradle, Maven, plus Jenkins or Hudson today already, I hope. Is everybody doing that? Please tell me you are. Yes, good. So the next step really to take is to look at tools like Chef, Puppet, and Vagrant to go beyond just building and running some basic tests to actually running regression test suites, performance test suites, and packaging test suites. And then you can actually really start pushing your product out in an automated fashion incredibly quickly. CV++. Do we have any contractors in the room? Freelancers? They know exactly what I'm talking about. Do we have any hiring people in the room? People who are responsible for hiring contractors? Okay, there's 1 or 2 people. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. In the last 6 weeks that contractor is working for you, they're not working for you. They're working on improving their CV by using the latest bleeding edge technology they can find. The next thing that they've been looking at up on this guy, the TOB index, which tells you what languages are popular at the moment. Highly scientific, by the way. I recommend you check it out. I think Visual Basic is still the number 3 language in the world, so if you're going to quit Java, you know what to move on to next. The reality is, especially as a contractor, especially as a freelancer, as long as you're just good at the principles and you really think deeply about the principles, frameworks come and go. They're like fads. Even languages actually come and go. They're like fads. One of the most popular languages today on the JVM that's got this massive rising curve is a language called Clojure. Have people heard of Clojure here? Yeah? It's a Lisp, for crying out loud. We had that back in, I think, 1963. So it's just come in this big full cycle, just like the bad fashion from the 1980s is starting to come back. Really not cool. So if you're good at the principles, if you're good at the concepts behind functional programming, if you're good at the concepts behind immutability and not sharing state and things, then it doesn't matter whether it's Clojure or some other language that calls itself Matthias Carlson. Right? You'll be able to understand the principles, and within a few days you'll be up and running with that new language or that new framework, whatever. So please do not spend your time wasting away learning how to use Hibernate. Understand how ORMs work. Don't learn how to use Spring. Understand why you want to use dependency injection and where you should use it. It will be far more valuable to your career going forwards. Another key point is that I don't really tend to care how good a programmer you are. So unless you're working for Google or you're building the next nuclear power plant, being a software developer, being a good software developer, is far more important than being a good deep down technical programmer. Again, if you can't communicate your idea, if you can't test your code, if you don't know how to deploy your code, if you didn't even bother asking for the requirements from your end users, then it doesn't matter if you're a good programmer because no one will ever use your software. So if you're agonizing over whether you can understand Doug Lee's concurrency libraries inside out, don't panic. Know how to use them as a good developer, as a good user of the API. Definitely look a little bit under the hood so you don't get caught out by traps. But don't panic if you don't know what a CAS operation does on an Intel i7 770 chip. Okay, you'll be okay. On to my favorites. Biggest frickin' buzzword of the year 2010, 2011, 2012, and I know exactly what the tech journalists are going to do this year. 2013, year of the cloud. This time we're going to make it. Who here is actually running their entire operation on the cloud? One. Well, that's more than I got at Java 1, which was an audience of about 400 people. And it goes to show that at conferences and in technical blogs and in the tech magazines, there's a lot of hype about what's coming next, but it's not the reality of what's happening now. So if you're worried about cloud, then this is all you really need to worry about, probably for the next year as well. Cloud in particular is an interesting space. For Java and the JVM recently, probably last year, about 5 or 6 new, well actually 15 to 16 new providers came out. So you've got now Oracle's public cloud, you've got Google App Engine, you've got Cloud Foundry, OpenShift, EC2, JElastic, CloudBees, the list goes on and on and on. So there's lots of choice out there. You can get free accounts with all of them. You can have a Hello World servlet up and running in about half an hour. And you can start exploring the limitations of the cloud environment. And there are a lot of limitations. Quite often, no access to the file system, limited networking, only allowed to make outbound connections, lots of little things like that. So don't panic about the cloud, and if your CTO or CIO comes back having read that trade magazine and says, we're moving everything to the cloud, kill him and hide the body. The other overhyped trend, mobile. Who here has written a mobile application? Why are you sitting here? You're all millionaires, right? You're all part of the mobile revolution. Maybe you own this conference center, maybe that's why you're sitting here. Unfortunately, the days of us poor developers making a killing out of mobile development died probably 2 years ago. There's now, I think, several million apps and app stores around the place, mainly built by large studios with large budgets. So if you want to get into the whole mobile, tablet, smartphone game, then unless you're being a really well-paid contractor or a well-paid employee, then my suggestion is go buy a lotto ticket. You're going to have much more success with that. Mobile is very much overhyped. It is actually incredibly difficult to develop for. Out of the people who develop mobile, any Android developers? Are you enjoying having to write the UI for over 700 different screen configurations? No. It is just utterly ridiculous, and I don't think there's any library or framework out there that's managed to pull it off yet. So the one trick I can advise is if you're stuck in the Android world especially, just write your app in HTML5 and just wrap it in the little native app wrapper so it can go in the App Store. You'll be far better off. Don't even want to talk about UX. Makes me sad. Except for this. People constantly say that us developers are bad at UI, we're bad at UX, and we need designers and real human beings. I've been told this so many times. Oh, you just need a real human being to help you design. I am a real human being. Really. Not a robot, I promise. Just a slight obsession with Star Wars, but that's okay, right? Think about what annoys you. We are some of the heaviest application and app users in the world. We complain on Hacker News. We write into Slashdot. We complain if a button is slightly out on our iPhone or on our Android screen. So apply that to yourself when you are designing software for others. Be your own worst critic. And if you've got someone in your team who always hates your code, and there's always one nemesis in every team, get that person to look at your design as well. Almost coming to the end. No SQL and big data. So we swapped to using MongoDB for our customer infrastructure, and you know, it's kind of replication, sharding, failover, load balancing, eventual consistency, all these fancy words which basically mean I can Haz Cloud. It does actually work really well if configured correctly. I have seen the master node swap seamlessly overnight when something's gone wrong, and I've woken up the next day and everything is humming along beautifully. Wonderful. My financial director then says, I would like to know how many products we have sold last week. And I go, that's a very good question, Moss. I just need to teach you some JSON first, or maybe some Erlang, and if you can write a map reduce in Erlang or in JSON, that will give you the answer. And he just looked at me and said, I think you just told me to go and screw myself. And that is fundamentally one of the biggest problems with NoSQL today. It is very, very difficult to query. And there's all sorts of solutions being played out at the moment, both in commercial and open source spaces. If you can be that person who writes an amazing query language that works across all NoSQL solutions, you will be hailed as the hero of big data NoSQL. So that could be something that might get you a company that big database companies that are the color red would be very interested in buying you because they can afford to buy islands after all. You have to think about the type of data you are storing. There is no point in storing social graph type data for relationships such as Facebook and Twitter in a document storage system or in a column database. It just doesn't work. Okay? You really have to think carefully. So for those who don't know the NoSQL space very well, you have lots of different types, lots of variants. You've got graph databases, you have column databases, document databases, object databases, and many hybrids in between. So please prototype and evaluate carefully. Don't just pick MongoDB because they've got the coolest evangelists, or Cassandra because you saw a blog post saying it was awesome. You need to prototype it and think about your non-functionals. Do you want eventual consistency? Do you need failover? Do you need fast reads, fast writes? Do you need your business people to be able to query the data so they can actually figure out whether your company is going to collapse next week or not? Our company has no idea. We don't know how many products we've sold. It's quite a worry. So I'm going to conclude. I think I'm finishing a little bit early, but that's okay because it leaves time for questions or your own personal horror stories. But my conclusion after giving this talk a couple of times now is that we're actually all doomed. Software development is far too complex. Your colleagues are generally underqualified. Your managers more often than not have got no idea what they're doing. Users are constantly changing their minds. They never know what they want. So I propose that next year, instead of coming to JFocus and working in this industry, that we all join together and buy Matthias a private jet that we all go on together, and we all run a bar on the beach in the Bahamas. Does that sound nice? Yeah, cool. So, in reality, take a deep breath. Do not panic about the fact that you may not know the latest thing about cloud or how to develop on mobile, or that you don't have, a cluster of 100 nodes running on EC2. Don't panic that you haven't learnt NoSQL yet, or that you don't know every design pattern in the book. A lot of this stuff is hype that's pushed at you by the industry, pushed at you by book authors, because we're trying to make sales, and pushed at you by conference speakers because we like to fly around the world and talk on stages. The reality is only you yourself know what you need to do for your daily job or for your more fun hobbies in the weekends in terms of software development. And the people you should really bounce ideas off are your colleagues, your peers next to you. Because the heroes and the industry leaders aren't really necessarily the people like Brian Gertz, Doug Lee, Josh Block, and other luminaries. It's the person who quietly sits down and figures out how to use a design pattern for the problem they're trying to solve for their customer that day and makes themselves and their customer very happy. It's that quiet developer, those quiet champions, which is actually what drives our industry forward. It's all you guys sitting out there. And I can see some people have been ignoring me the whole 45 minutes and have actually been quietly getting some code done. And all I can say is, my hat's off to you, because that is fantastic. I wish I could do that more often. So thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that extremely technical session on assembly programming. And yeah, if there are any questions, yell away. I'll try and see you. Are there any horror stories you want to share? The author of Hibernate in the room? Cool, okay. Well, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of JFocus. And don't forget to tell Matthias he's awesome.